The first blush of dawn stretched across Oakhaven, painting the sky in hues of rose and lavender, a gentle promise of a new day. Elara Vance, already awake, stood by her kitchen window, a mug of steaming chamomile tea warming her hands. Below, the narrow cobblestone street of Elderberry Lane was still in slumber, the only sounds the distant sigh of the ocean and the soft rustle of leaves in the ancient oak that gave the town its name. Elara loved these quiet hours. They were hers alone, a sacred space before the world awoke, and her own small world. The gilded leaf tea shop and apothecary hummed with gentle life. Her shop, nestled between a quaint bakery and a dusty antique store, was her sanctuary. Its scent was a comforting blend of dried herbs, exotic spices, and the faint sweet perfume of jasmine. Here, Elara crafted her herbal infusions, blended custom teas, and prepared remedies for the townsfolk, her hands guided by intuition and generations of inherited wisdom. She wasn't just a shop owner. She was a keeper of secrets, a quiet confidante, and a gentle healer. Her home was above the shop, a cozy haven of worn wood and soft textiles, filled with books, botanical prints, and the quiet presence of her potted herbs. Elara herself was a study in gentle grace. Her hair, the color of rich earth, was usually braided and tucked away. Her eyes, the shade of moss after rain, held a thoughtful, often dreamy quality. She moved with a quiet efficiency, her steps light, her touch deliberate. Today, however, there was a subtle shift in the air, a whisper that wasn't quite the sea breeze or the rustling leaves. It was a premonition, a faint hum beneath the usual rhythm of Oakhaven. Elara wasn't one for grand prophecies, but she listened to these subtle cues, the way a sailor listens to the changing wind. She dressed in her usual simple linen dress, her apron tied neatly at her waist, and descended the creaking wooden stairs to the shop. The air was cool and still, carrying the faint, sweet scent of the bakery next door beginning its morning bake. She unlocked the heavy oak door, the bell above it tinkling a soft welcome, and began her daily ritual. She polished the smooth wooden counter, arranged her rows of amber bottles filled with tinctures and oils, and carefully displayed her various tea blends in elegant glass jars. Each jar was labeled in her neat, looping script. Morning Sunshine for an invigorating citrus blend, Dream Weaver for a calming lavender and valerian mix, and Heart's Ease for a rose and hawthorn infusion. By the time the first rays of sun angled through the front window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air, a sense of quiet contentment settled over her. The gilded leaf was ready. The morning unfolded with its usual gentle pace. Mrs. Gable from the bakery popped in for her usual robust remedy blend for her perpetually tired feet. Mr. Henderson, the lighthouse keeper from before it was decommissioned, bought his memory lane chai, a blend Elara created specifically for his nostalgic stories of the sea. They all shared snippets of Oakhaven life, the quiet gossip, the daily happenings. Today, however, there was a new thread woven into their conversations. "Did you hear about the old lighthouse, Elara?" Mrs. Gable asked, her voice a little breathless as she leaned conspiratorially over the counter. "They say someone's finally come to restore it. A city fellow, apparently." Elara nodded, feigning casual interest. The old lighthouse, perched majestically on the cliffs overlooking the harbor, had been a derelict beauty for decades. Its broken lantern and crumbling stone were a beloved, if melancholic, landmark. The idea of it being restored was both exciting and a little unsettling. Change, even good change, always brought a ripple through Oakhaven's placid waters. "Indeed," she replied, arranging a display of dried lavender bundles. "I heard a rumor. A new face in town, then." "Oh, a very new face," Mr. Henderson chimed in, his eyes twinkling. "Saw him this morning, down by the docks. Young man, tall, with eyes the color of a storm-tossed sea. Looked quite determined, he did." Elara felt a subtle quickening of her pulse. Storm-tossed sea eyes. It was a vivid image. She had always been drawn to the raw power of the ocean, its untamed beauty. A man with eyes like that felt significant. The whispers were getting louder. Later that afternoon, as the sun began its slow descent, casting long shadows across Elderberry Lane, the bell above her shop door tinkled with a different kind of urgency. Elara looked up from labeling a new batch of evening calm tea. Standing in her doorway was a man who fit Mr. Henderson's description with unsettling accuracy. He was tall indeed, with a lean, athletic build that spoke of quiet strength. His hair was a deep, rich brown, falling in a slightly disheveled way across his forehead, and his eyes, those eyes were exactly as Mr. Henderson had described. A captivating blend of gray and blue, like the ocean on a day when the weather was about to turn, holding a depth that seemed both weary and intensely observant. He wore a simple, well-worn denim shirt and sturdy work boots, smudged with what looked like plaster dust. His presence filled the small shop, not with arrogance, but with a quiet, grounded energy that Alara felt deep in her bones. He glanced around, his gaze sweeping over the shelves of herbs, the tea jars, the arcane symbols on some of her older bottles, a hint of curiosity flickering in his storm-colored eyes. When his gaze finally settled on Alara, a faint, almost shy smile touched his lips. "Good afternoon," he said, his voice a low rumble, surprisingly gentle. "I hope I'm not disturbing you. My name is Leo Maxwell." "Not at all, Mr. Maxwell," Alara replied, her own voice a little softer than usual. "Welcome to the Gilded Leaf. I'm Alara Vance." She extended a hand across the counter. His grip was firm, warm, and brief, leaving a lingering impression on her palm. "Leo, please," he corrected gently. "And Alara, it's a beautiful name. This is quite a shop you have here. It smells magical." Alara felt a blush creep up her neck. "Thank you. It's a labor of love. What can I help you with today, Leo?" He ran a hand through his hair, a slight hesitation in his posture. "Well, I'm not entirely sure. I've just moved into Oakhaven. I'm the one taking on the lighthouse project, actually." He paused, as if expecting some reaction. "Ah, yes," Alara said, a genuine smile now gracing her lips. "The whole town is buzzing with the news. We're all very excited to see it brought back to life." "I hope so," he chuckled, a rich, pleasant sound. "It's quite a task, and it seems to require a lot of focus, long days. I was told this was the place for a good cup of tea. Something to keep me going, but without the jitters of too much coffee. And perhaps something for winding down after a day of hauling stone." Alara's gaze softened. He wasn't just looking for tea. He was looking for balance, for comfort in the midst of a demanding project. This was her language. "I understand completely," she said, moving from behind the counter to stand before her wall of tea jars. "For focus and energy without the crash, I'd suggest our Coastal Clarity blend. It's a blend of green tea, ginkgo, and rosemary. Excellent for mental acuity. And for winding down..." She paused, her fingers hovering over a jar of deep purple leaves. "For winding down, especially after physical exertion, our deep slumber blend. It's a blend of valerian, passionflower, and a touch of lavender. It will ease muscle tension and quiet the mind." Leo watched her, his eyes following her movements with an intense, almost analytical focus that didn't feel intrusive, but rather deeply attentive. "That sounds perfect, both of them. You seem to know exactly what I need." "It's my job," Alara said, a quiet warmth spreading through her. "And a bit of intuition. I'll make you a small batch of each so you can try them before committing to a larger order." As she measured out the herbs, the delicate scents mingling in the air, she felt his presence behind her, a comfortable stillness. She could feel his gaze on her, and it wasn't uncomfortable. It was like a quiet observation, a gentle curiosity. "So, the lighthouse," Alara began, making conversation as she meticulously weighed the ingredients. "It's a huge undertaking. Have you done restorations like this before?" "Yes, but never one quite so iconic," Leo admitted. "There's a history here, a soul to the structure. You can feel it. It's not just bricks and mortar, it's memories, stories, and the views are spectacular, even in its current state." "Oakhaven always says the lighthouse watches over us," Alara murmured, scooping the blended teas into small, biodegradable bags. "It's a part of who we are." "I'm beginning to understand that," Leo said softly. "It's a beautiful place, Oakhaven, very different from the city." "And what brought you to Oakhaven specifically for this project?" Alara asked, tying the last bag with a small ribbon. He hesitated for a moment, and Alara sensed a deeper story beneath the surface. "A change of pace, mostly. And a chance to work on something meaningful. I've always been drawn to structures that tell a story, that have stood the test of time." He paused, then added, "And the sea air. There's something about it that clears the mind." Alara nodded, understanding. She felt the same pull, the same cleansing power of the ocean. She handed him the 2 small bags of tea. "These are on the house, for welcoming you to Oakhaven." Leo's eyes widened slightly. "Oh, you don't have to do that." "I insist," Alara said, her smile genuine. "Consider it a small token from the Gilded Leaf. I hope they bring you comfort." He took the bags, his fingers brushing hers again. This time, the spark was unmistakable, a tiny jolt that traveled up her arm. "Thank you, Alara. Truly, this is very kind." He looked at the bags, then back at her, a thoughtful expression on his face. "I'll be sure to let you know which one works best for hauling stone." He winked, a surprising flash of humor in his serious eyes. Alara laughed, a soft melodious sound. "I look forward to hearing about it." As Leo turned to leave, the bell above the door jingled a gentle farewell. Alara watched him go, a strange lightness in her chest. The quiet hum she'd felt that morning had intensified, blossoming into a gentle warmth. She spent the rest of the afternoon in a pleasant haze, her thoughts drifting back to Leo Maxwell. His quiet strength, his observant eyes, the subtle kindness in his voice. He wasn't like the other men who sometimes passed through Oakhaven, all bluster and fleeting promises. There was a groundedness about him, a sense of purpose that resonated with her own quiet dedication to her craft. The whispers in the air seemed to have solidified, taking on a form and a name, Leo Maxwell. Alara closed the shop a little later than usual, lingering over tidying her workstation. The scent of the herbs felt more potent tonight, more alive. She made herself a cup of her dream weaver tea, adding a touch of honey, and climbed the stairs to her apartment. From her window, she could just glimpse the silhouette of the lighthouse on the distant cliff, a dark sentinel against the deepening twilight. Tonight, though, it didn't look quite so lonely. It looked like it was waiting. She sat by her window, sipping her tea, the familiar quiet of her home wrapping around her like a soft blanket. But inside, a new thread had begun to unravel, a gentle curiosity that tugged at the edges of her peaceful world. The arrival of Leo Maxwell felt like more than just a new customer, more than just a new project for Oakhaven. It felt like a subtle shift in the very fabric of her existence, a quiet invitation to something new, something she hadn't known she was waiting for. The night deepened, the stars beginning to prick through the velvet sky. The ocean's sighs grew louder, a constant, soothing presence. Alara felt a sense of anticipation, a gentle wonder. What would tomorrow bring? What other whispers would the wind carry to her from the lighthouse, from the man with storm-tossed eyes? She felt a quiet excitement stir within her, a new note in the symphony of her peaceful life. And as she drifted off to sleep, the scent of lavender and the image of a tall, kind stranger filled her dreams. The story of the lighthouse, and perhaps her own story, had just begun to unfold. The first rays of dawn, filtered through the delicate lace curtains of her cottage, painted soft stripes across Alara's room. She stirred, a smile already gracing her lips before she was fully awake, a faint echo of the previous night's dream still shimmering in her mind. The scent of lavender, both from the fields outside and the sachet beneath her pillow, mingled with the fresh salt tang of the sea. She stretched, her body feeling lighter, imbued with a quiet energy she hadn't noticed before. As she moved through her morning ritual, brewing fragrant herbal tea, tending to her small indoor herb garden, and opening the windows to let in the cool, crisp air, her gaze kept drifting towards the distant silhouette of the lighthouse. It stood sentinel on the craggy promontory, a stark, beautiful pillar against the brightening sky. She imagined him there, the man with storm-tossed eyes, perhaps sipping his own morning brew, looking out over the vast expanse of the ocean. A warmth bloomed in her chest, gentle and persistent. Her day was usually filled with peaceful pursuits, tending her lavender fields, distilling essential oils, crafting fragrant soaps and sachets for the village market. Today, however, her hands felt a little less steady, her mind a little more prone to wandering. She found herself humming a tune she didn't quite recognize, a melody that felt both ancient and new, like the sea itself. The quiet excitement from last night had ripened into a soft, yearning curiosity. By mid-morning, the call of the sea became irresistible. Alara decided to take a walk along the winding coastal path that hugged the cliffs, a path she often frequented but today held a new allure. She packed a small basket with a thermos of tea and a few lavender biscuits, telling herself it was for a peaceful picnic, though a part of her hoped for something more. The path led her past windswept gorse bushes, and hardy seagrasses, their resilience a testament to the wild beauty of the coastline. As she walked, the sound of the waves crashing against the rocks grew louder, a rhythmic heartbeat accompanying her thoughts. The path eventually dipped down towards a secluded cove, a favorite spot of hers, where smooth, colorful pebbles lined the shore. It was here, near the base of the lighthouse's towering cliff, that she often felt closest to the raw power of nature. Today, however, her eyes were drawn not to the churning turquoise waters, but to a figure on the rocks a little further along the shore. It was him. He was crouched, his back to her, seemingly examining something in the tidal pools. His dark hair was ruffled by the breeze, and the sturdy fabric of his work jacket stretched across broad shoulders. He moved with a quiet competence, a natural grace that spoke of a deep connection to this wild place. Elara hesitated, her heart giving a little flutter against her ribs. Should she approach? Would she disturb him? A shyness she hadn't felt since her youth suddenly enveloped her. Just as she was contemplating turning back, a small dark shape detached itself from the rocks near him and scuttled away. Elias straightened up, his gaze following the movement of a quick-footed crab, and then, slowly, his eyes swept across the cove. They landed on Elara. For a moment, neither of them moved. The wind carried the scent of salt and gulls' cries between them. His eyes, she saw now, were even more captivating in the daylight. A deep, shifting gray blue, like the sea before a storm, yet softened by an undeniable kindness. A slow smile spread across his face, not wide or boisterous, but warm and genuine, reaching his eyes and crinkling the corners. It melted away her shyness instantly. "Good morning," he called out, his voice a low rumble, carrying easily over the wind. It was deeper than she'd imagined, laced with a gentle gravel. "Good morning," Elara replied, her own voice a little breathy. She felt a blush creep up her neck, but she met his gaze without faltering. "I hope I'm not disturbing you." He pushed a hand through his already tousled hair, a faint smudge of what looked like grease on his cheekbone. "Not at all, just checking on the tide pools, and admiring the view." His gaze swept across the cove, then back to her, lingering for a moment. "You're Elara from the Lavender Cottage, aren't you?" Her eyebrows lifted in surprise. "You know my name?" He gave a soft chuckle. "Word travels fast in these parts, even to the lighthouse, and your lavender fields are quite remarkable. I often catch their scent on the wind." He took a few steps towards her, closing the distance between them. He was even taller than she remembered, his presence both commanding and reassuring. "I'm Elias." He offered her a hand, his palm calloused but surprisingly gentle. "It's a pleasure to finally meet you, Elias," she said, her fingers tingling slightly from the brief contact. "I've seen your light for weeks now." He smiled, a hint of something wistful in his eyes. "And I've seen the soft glow from your cottage, a comforting sight on a long night." He gestured to her basket. "Are you out for a walk?" "Yes, a walk and a small picnic," she confirmed. "The air is so fresh today." "It is," he agreed, his gaze thoughtful. "I should get back to my duties, but perhaps you'd allow me to join you for a moment, if the offer of tea and biscuits still stands?" He gestured vaguely to her basket with a hopeful glint in his eyes. Elara's heart did another little flutter. "Of course, I'd be delighted." They found a flat, sun-warmed slab of rock overlooking the sea. Elara laid out a small cloth and unpacked her thermos and biscuits. Elias sat beside her, his long frame settling easily, his movements unhurried. The silence between them wasn't awkward but comfortable, filled with the sounds of the sea and the shared warmth of the sun. "These are delicious," he said, biting into a lavender biscuit. "The scent is unmistakable." "Thank you," she replied, pleased. "I make them with lavender from my fields." "I suspected as much," he said, a thoughtful expression on his face. "There's a unique piece to your place, Elara, even from afar." "And to yours, Elias," she countered, looking up at the majestic lighthouse. "Though I imagine it's quite a solitary life." He nodded, gazing out at the horizon. "It can be, but there's a profound purpose to it. To guide, to warn, to keep vigil. It's a quiet satisfaction." He turned to her, his storm-tossed eyes softening. "But it's also good to have company, especially good company." They talked for what felt like both minutes and hours. He spoke of the rhythms of the sea, the migratory patterns of birds he observed from his high perch, the intricate workings of the lighthouse lamp. He spoke with a quiet passion, his words painting vivid pictures of a world Elara knew mostly from a distance. She in turn told him about her lavender, the different varieties she cultivated, the challenges and joys of coaxing beauty from the earth. She found herself opening up to him with an ease that surprised her, sharing anecdotes about her quirky village neighbors and the simple pleasures of her life. Elias listened intently, his gaze unwavering, making her feel seen and heard in a way she hadn't experienced before. There was a depth to his listening, a genuine interest that went beyond polite conversation. She noticed the way his eyes would crinkle at the corners when she made a small joke, or how his brow would furrow slightly in thoughtful consideration. As the sun began its slow descent, painting the sky in hues of orange and rose, Elias finally stretched. I truly should get back. The light will need its evening check. He stood, offering her a hand to help her up. Thank you for joining me, Elias, Elira said, her voice soft. It was lovely. It was more than lovely, Elara, he corrected, his thumb brushing lightly against her palm before he released her hand. It was a gift. Thank you for the tea and the conversation. And the biscuits, of course. He smiled, that warm, genuine smile that reached his eyes. Perhaps our paths will cross again soon? I hope so, she replied, a genuine warmth spreading through her. He nodded, a silent promise in his gaze, and then turned, climbing with practiced ease back up the rocky path towards the lighthouse. Elara watched him go, a profound sense of contentment settling over her. The quiet excitement had not faded. Instead, it had deepened, transformed into a gentle, hopeful anticipation. Over the next few weeks, their paths did indeed cross. Elias would sometimes appear in the village, a tall, striking figure amidst the familiar faces, ostensibly for supplies. He would always make a point of stopping by Elara's stall at the market, chatting with her as she sold her fragrant wares. He'd buy a small bundle of dried lavender, claiming it brought a pleasant scent to the otherwise austere rooms of the lighthouse. He'd ask about her harvest, her day, her thoughts, always with that quiet, intense focus that made her feel like the most interesting person in the world. Elara, in turn, found herself making more frequent trips to the coastal path, always with a plausible reason, foraging for herbs, sketching the sea, enjoying the fresh air. More often than not, she would encounter Elias, either on his way down from the lighthouse or during a brief respite from his duties. Their conversations grew longer, more personal. She learned that Elias had been a sailor in his younger years, navigating treacherous waters, but had eventually sought the grounded stability of the lighthouse. He spoke of a longing for a different kind of purpose, one that felt less transient, more anchored. There was a quiet strength in him, a resilience that had clearly been forged by the sea, but also a hidden tenderness that revealed itself in his gentle eyes and the careful way he listened. He confessed to a fondness for old books and classical music, surprising her with the depth of his interests. One blustery afternoon, a sudden squall rolled in, catching Elara off guard during one of her walks. The wind whipped her hair, and the rain began to fall in heavy sheets. She was struggling to pull her scarf tighter around her when a strong hand gently but firmly took her arm, guiding her beneath the sparse shelter of a rocky overhang. Careful, Elara. Elias's voice rumbled close to her ear, his presence a sudden comforting warmth against the chill. He had appeared seemingly out of nowhere, his oilskin coat glistening with rain. These storms can come quickly. Thank you, Elias, she said, her voice slightly breathless, both from the wind and his proximity. I should have paid more attention to the sky. He stood close beside her, his height providing a surprising shield from the elements. The scent of sea salt and his own unique earthy aroma filled her senses. For a moment, they simply stood in comfortable silence, watching the tempest rage around them. The raw power of the storm felt less frightening with him beside her. It reminds you of how small we are, doesn't it? He mused, his gaze fixed on the churning gray sea. And yet, how resilient. Like the lighthouse, Elara murmured, looking up at him. His eyes, in the muted light, were like storm clouds themselves, beautiful and deep. He smiled, a rare, open smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes and sent a shiver of warmth through her. Indeed, a constant in a world of change. He paused, then looked down at her, his expression growing more serious, yet still infinitely gentle. I'm glad I found you, Elara. I wouldn't want you out here alone in this. Her heart gave a little lurch. The simple sincerity of his words, the genuine concern in his eyes, touched something deep within her. I'm glad too, Elias. As the rain lessened to a drizzle, he walked her back to the path leading to her cottage, making sure she was safely on her way. He didn't linger, but the quiet understanding that had passed between them in the shelter of the rocks lingered in the air, a silent promise hanging between them like the mist on the horizon. Elara found herself spending her evenings looking out at the lighthouse, the rhythmic sweep of its beam across the dark waters becoming a lullaby that spoke directly to her heart. She felt a connection forming, a gentle thread weaving itself between her peaceful lavender cottage and the solitary beacon on the cliff. It was more than just friendship, more than just curiosity. It was a burgeoning sense of belonging, a feeling that a piece of her story, hitherto unwritten, was finally finding its counterpart in the man who kept the light. The thought of Elias, so solid and kind, with his storm-tossed eyes and his gentle smile, filled her with a warmth that chased away any lingering chill. Her world, once perfectly content in its quiet solitude, was expanding, embracing new possibilities, new emotions, and she found herself welcoming every single one. What new horizons would this beautiful connection bring? She couldn't wait to find out. The soft click of the lighthouse door closing behind her was a gentle punctuation mark to the evening. Elara descended the spiral stairs, the rhythmic thrum of the lantern above her a comforting heartbeat in the quiet night. Elias had walked her to the entrance, his presence a warm anchor in the vastness of the sea-kissed air. He hadn't said much. Just a quiet good night, Elara. His voice a low rumble that resonated deep within her. But his gaze, direct and open, held a myriad of unspoken things, a shared understanding, a burgeoning curiosity, a promise of more. Back in her small cottage, the familiar scent of old books and sea salt wrapped around her like a beloved shawl. She lit the oil lamp, its golden glow banishing the shadows, but the inner light Elias had sparked continued to burn brightly. Her usual evening ritual, a quiet hour spent reading or sketching by the fire, felt different tonight. Her mind, usually so easily absorbed by fictional worlds, kept drifting back to the real one, to the man in the lighthouse. She found herself replaying their conversations, the way his brow furrowed in concentration when she spoke of her stories, the easy, rumbling laugh that had escaped him when she'd recounted a particularly amusing anecdote about a stubborn seagull. It wasn't just his kindness, or his quiet strength that drew her in. It was the depth she sensed beneath the calm surface, the hint of stories untold in his storm-tossed eyes. She realized she wanted to know those stories. She wanted to be a part of them. The next morning dawned with a pearl-gray sky, the sea a placid sheet reflecting the muted light. Elara, typically an early riser, felt an unfamiliar restlessness. Her writing desk, usually her sanctuary, seemed to beckon less strongly than the path leading up to the lighthouse. She pushed aside her half-formed plot ideas and instead pulled on her sturdy boots, a thick wool jumper, and a scarf, deciding a walk along the cliffs was in order. The air was crisp, carrying the invigorating tang of salt and damp earth. As she walked, the familiar landscape seemed imbued with a new vibrancy. The gulls cried overhead with a sharper clarity, the waves crashed against the rocks with a more resonant roar. She found herself scanning the horizon, not for inspiration for her next chapter, but for a glimpse of the distant lighthouse, and perhaps the man within. She didn't intend to go all the way to the lighthouse, merely to walk, to breathe, to sort through the gentle chaos Elias had stirred within her. But her feet, it seemed, had a mind of their own. Before she knew it, she was nearing the winding path that led up to its sturdy base. A figure was emerging from the small keeper's cottage nestled beside the tower, carrying a pail. It was Elias. He straightened, seeing her, and a slow smile spread across his face, lighting up his eyes. "Elara," he called, his voice carrying easily on the wind. "Early for a visit, aren't you?" "Just enjoying the morning," she replied, a blush rising to her cheeks caught in her unspoken quest. "Though I suppose my feet knew where they were going before I did." He chuckled, a warm, inviting sound. "Happens to the best of us. Come, I was just about to make a pot of tea. The sea air can be bracing." Elara's heart gave a little skip. Tea? A simple domestic gesture, yet it felt laden with significance. She followed him into the small, surprisingly cozy cottage, a stark contrast to the vast, echoing tower. It was sparsely furnished but meticulously kept, with a comfortable armchair by a small hearth, a well-worn table, and shelves overflowing with books, navigation charts, and a curious collection of polished sea glass. "Make yourself comfortable," Elias said, gesturing towards the armchair. He moved with an easy grace, his large hands surprisingly deft as he filled the kettle and set it on the hob. "I take it you're not on deadline today?" "Not quite," Alara admitted, settling into the armchair, which smelled faintly of wood smoke and old wool. "Though you've certainly given me plenty of new material to ponder." She met his gaze, a quiet challenge in her eyes. "My heroine might just find herself falling for a lighthouse keeper." Elias paused, a faint flush dusting his cheeks. He turned back to the kettle, but not before she saw the genuine pleasure in his expression. "She'd be a sensible woman then," he murmured, the corners of his lips twitching upwards. They talked for hours that morning, the tea growing cold in their mugs as the conversation flowed effortlessly. Alara learned about the intricacies of the lighthouse, the constant vigil, the surprisingly complex machinery, the solitary rhythm of Elias's life. He spoke of storms weathered, of distant ships guided safely home, of the quiet satisfaction of his duty. He didn't romanticize it, but spoke of it with a deep, abiding respect, a sense of purpose that resonated with Alara's own dedication to her craft. In turn, she shared more about her writing, her fascination with stories, the joy of crafting worlds from words. She spoke of her childhood, growing up in a small inland town, and how the sea had always called to her, an untamed wilderness that held endless narrative possibilities. They discovered a shared love for old maps, for forgotten histories, and for the simple pleasure of a perfectly brewed cup of tea. As the morning wore on, a sliver of sunlight pierced through the clouds, painting a golden path across the waves. Elias excused himself briefly to check the lantern room, and Alara watched him go, a profound sense of peace settling over her. This was more than just charming conversation. It was a genuine connection, built on shared values and a quiet understanding that transcended mere words. When he returned, he carried a small, intricately carved wooden bird. "Found this washed up on the beach last week," he said, handing it to her. "Thought you might appreciate the craftsmanship. It looks like a curlew." Alara turned the bird over in her palm. It was worn smooth by the sea, but the delicate carving of its long, curved beak and slender legs was still visible. "It's beautiful, Elias. Thank you." She looked up at him, a warmth blossoming in her chest. It was a simple gift, yet it spoke volumes, a thoughtfulness, a recognition of her appreciation for beauty and small, hidden treasures. "Perhaps," he said, his gaze lingering on her face, "you might like to join me for a walk along the tide line sometime. There's always something interesting to find after a good storm." "I'd like that very much," she replied, her voice softer than she intended. Their walks became a quiet ritual. Several afternoons a week, Alara would meet Elias on the beach, or he would stop by her cottage on his way back from a supply run to the nearest village. They would comb the shore, Elias with his practiced eye for flotsam and jetsam that might be useful, Alara with her novelist's curiosity for the stories the sea carried. They found smooth pebbles, intriguing pieces of driftwood, the occasional lost buoy, and once, a message in a bottle, a child's drawing of a pirate ship, carefully corked and sent on its journey. These excursions were woven with easy conversation, laughter, and comfortable silences. Alara found herself sharing details of her inner world she hadn't voiced to anyone else. Her struggles with a particularly stubborn plot point, her musings on the nature of solitude, her quiet joys in everyday observations. Elias listened intently, his presence a steady, reassuring anchor. He didn't offer platitudes, but his responses were always thoughtful, insightful, often peppered with a practical wisdom gleaned from years of living close to the elements. One blustery afternoon, a sudden squall swept in, catching them unawares a good distance from their respective homes. The sky turned a bruised purple, and the wind whipped their hair and clothes. Elias, ever practical, steered them towards a small sheltered cove he knew, a cleft in the cliffs barely visible from the beach. Inside, it was surprisingly dry and still, the roar of the wind muted to a distant sigh. "We'll wait it out here," he said, his voice calm, even as the rain began to lash down outside. He pulled a thick oilskin blanket from his backpack, always prepared, Alara noted with a fond smile, and spread it over a smooth rock. "Care for a bit of chocolate? Emergency rations for unexpected delays." They sat shoulder to shoulder, sharing the dark chocolate, the rich sweetness a comforting counterpoint to the wild weather outside. The small space felt intimate, safe. Elara leaned her head back against the cool rock, suddenly aware of the warmth of Elias's arm brushing hers. The scent of rain, sea, and his own subtle earthy fragrance filled her senses. "You're very resourceful," she commented, feeling a lightness in her chest. He chuckled. "Comes with the territory. A lighthouse keeper needs to be ready for anything the sea throws at him. And believe me, it can throw quite a lot." His gaze was distant for a moment, shadowed by memories. "It teaches you to appreciate the quiet moments, the shelter from the storm." Elara looked at him, truly looked, and saw more than just the solid, dependable man. She saw a man who had faced his own storms, perhaps not just physical ones. There was a quiet strength there, yes, but also a vulnerability she hadn't quite perceived before. It made her heart ache with a gentle tenderness. "I think," she said softly, "you make a very good shelter." He turned his head, his eyes, the color of a stormy sea, meeting hers. The air crackled with an unspoken current, a recognition of the growing depth between them. For a long moment, neither of them spoke, the only sound the drumming of rain outside and the rapid beat of Elara's own heart. His gaze was searching, gentle, and utterly captivating. Just as Elara thought he might lean closer, might say something profound, a sudden gust of wind howled through the cove, scattering a shower of pebbles from the cliff face. The moment, fragile and beautiful, was broken. Elias cleared his throat, a faint flush on his cheeks. "Looks like it's easing up," he said, his voice a little rougher than before. "We should be able to make it back without too much trouble." The walk back was quieter, yet imbued with a heightened awareness. Elara felt the lingering warmth of his arm, the imprint of his gaze. Something had shifted in that small cove, a boundary subtly crossed. Their connection had deepened, moving beyond friendship into something more tender, more hopeful. Days turned into weeks, each one weaving another strand into the tapestry of their burgeoning relationship. Elara found her stories infused with new life, her characters imbued with a deeper understanding of courage and connection. Elias, in turn, found himself lingering a little longer on his rounds, his gaze often drawn to the small cottage where a lamp burned late into the night, knowing Elara was there, creating. One evening, Elara invited Elias to her cottage for supper. It was a simple meal, a hearty fish stew she'd perfected, fresh bread from the village baker, and berries picked from the hedgerows. The cottage, usually a solitary haven, felt warm and inviting with his presence. The flickering firelight danced across their faces, softening the edges of the room. "This is wonderful, Elara," Elias said, savoring a spoonful of the stew. "You're a truly gifted cook." "It's just a simple stew," she demurred, though his praise made her chest swell with pleasure. "Nothing compared to the comfort of your tea." They spoke of their day, of the news from the village, of the changing patterns of the sea. Elias, usually so reserved about his past, began to open up, slowly, tentatively. He spoke of his childhood in a coastal town further north, of losing his parents young, and of finding solace and purpose in the unwavering rhythm of the lighthouse. "It's a lonely life sometimes," he admitted, his gaze fixed on the fire, "but honest. And the light, it never lies." Elara listened, her heart aching with empathy. "It sounds like you've found your anchor, Elias." He looked at her then, his eyes reflecting the firelight. "I thought I had. But lately," he paused, searching for the right words, "lately, it feels like I've found something else, something brighter." His gaze held hers, direct and unwavering. "A new kind of light." Her breath caught in her throat. The unspoken declaration hung in the air, potent and fragile. She felt a profound sense of recognition, a mirroring of her own emotions. "I feel it too, Elias," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Like a new horizon has opened up." After supper, as the last embers glowed in the hearth, Elias helped her clear the table. His hand brushed hers as they reached for the same plate, and this time, the touch lingered. A spark, soft but undeniable, jumped between them. He didn't pull away, nor did she. The quiet intimacy of the moment was a tender revelation. "I should go," he said, his voice a low murmur, but he made no move to leave. He stood close to her, the air thick with unspoken desires. "Stay," Elara found herself saying. The word a soft exhalation, a brave leap into the unknown. He looked at her, a question in his eyes, a gentle hope. She met his gaze, her own heart open and vulnerable. Slowly he reached out, his large hand cupping her cheek, his thumb gently caressing her skin. His touch was warm, reassuring, sending shivers down her spine. "Elara," he breathed, his eyes searching hers, full of a depth of emotion that made her own eyes prickle. "You truly are a light." Then, slowly, carefully, he leaned in. Her eyes fluttered closed as his lips, soft and hesitant at first, met hers. It was a kiss born of tenderness and quiet yearning, a meeting of souls that had found each other across the vastness of the sea and the quiet solitude of their lives. It was not a fiery, passionate kiss, but one of gentle promise, of building trust, of two worlds finally, beautifully, intertwining. It tasted of sea salt and hope, of untold stories and a future waiting to be written. When he finally pulled back, their foreheads rested against each other, their breaths mingling in the silent room. Elara opened her eyes, finding his gaze still fixed on hers, full of a wondrous, dawning joy. The kiss had been everything she hadn't known she was waiting for. It was a quiet declaration, a confirmation of the deep, unwavering connection that had been growing between them. Elias stayed that night, not in the way of a hurried lover, but in the way of a man who had finally found home. They talked late into the night, their voices low and soft, sharing dreams and fears, and the quiet, profound joy of discovering a kindred spirit. They spoke of the future, not with grand plans, but with the gentle anticipation of two people eager to navigate the tides together. The next morning, the world felt brighter, infused with a new sense of possibility. Elias left before dawn, returning to his post, but he left behind a lingering warmth, a scent of wood smoke and sea air, and the imprint of his presence in every corner of her cottage and her heart. Elara sat at her writing desk, but the words on the page seemed to shimmer with a new understanding. The love story she had always imagined, the one that found beauty in the quiet moments and strength in gentle hearts, was no longer confined to her imagination. It was unfolding around her, real and tangible, as true as the sunrise over the vast, shimmering sea. Her world, once perfectly content in its quiet solitude, had not just expanded, it had deepened, enriched by the steady, unwavering light of Elias. And she knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that this was just the beginning. The story, their story, was only just starting to truly unfold. Their story unfolded not with grand gestures or dramatic pronouncements, but in the quiet symphony of shared existence. It began with mornings painted in hues of soft gray and rose, as Elias would often appear at Elara's cottage door, a thermos of steaming tea in one hand, a small, perfectly ripe fruit tart from Mrs. Gable's bakery in the other. He'd watch her hands, nimble and graceful, as she prepared her workspace, the scent of leather and old paper mingling with the fresh sea air drifting through the open window. He learned the rhythm of her days, the way her brow furrowed in concentration over a delicate repair, the quiet hum she sometimes made when a story truly captivated her. Elara, in turn, found herself drawn to the steady beat of his life. She'd walk with him to the lighthouse, the salty wind whipping strands of hair across her face, listening as he spoke of the sea's moods, the stars that guided him, the solitary vigil he kept. She started bringing him stories, not just the ones bound in leather, but tales whispered by the villagers, old legends of the coast, or simply the day's small happenings. She'd sit on the worn wooden stool in the lantern room, the colossal lens gleaming beside them, and read aloud. Her voice a soft counterpoint to the distant cry of gulls and the rhythmic churn of the waves. He'd listen, his gaze fixed on the horizon, but she could feel his attention, warm and encompassing, like the light he tended. They discovered shared joys in the simplest things. Long walks along the tide pools, collecting shells and smooth, sea-worn pebbles, Elias patiently explaining the names of the creatures scuttling beneath the rocks. Picnics on the cliff edge, wrapped in a thick wool blanket, sharing sandwiches and profound silences, the kind that only true understanding could create. Evenings spent by Elara's hearth, the firelight dancing on the spines of her books, as Elias would mend a broken fishing net he'd found washed ashore, his large hands surprisingly deft, while Elara sketched in her journal, capturing the curve of his profile, the intensity in his eyes. One blustery afternoon, a particularly challenging commission arrived at Alara's workshop, an ancient family Bible, its spine completely detached, its pages brittle with age and love. Alara felt a familiar flutter of anxiety, a deep desire to do justice to such a cherished heirloom, coupled with the pressure of its fragility. Elias, finding her hunched over the workbench, a small frown marring her usually serene expression, simply pulled up a chair. "What troubles you, Alara?" he asked, his voice low and comforting. She explained the delicacy of the task, the fear of damaging something irreplaceable. Elias, without a word, began to observe. He watched her meticulous process, the way she mixed her glues, pressed her papers, handled the aged leather. "It reminds me of mending sails," he mused after a long silence. Careful hands, strong threads, knowing the material's limits. He didn't offer to help directly, knowing her craft was hers alone, but his presence was a grounding force. He'd hand her the tiny specialized tools, hold a page steady while she applied a fine layer of adhesive, or simply make her another cup of tea. He became her silent apprentice, his calm energy a balm to her nerves. Together they brought the old Bible back to life, its covers reattached, its pages carefully reinforced, ready for generations more of stories. When the owner, an elderly woman with tears in her eyes, came to collect it, she marveled not just at Alara's skill, but at the quiet, reassuring presence of Elias beside her. "He's a good man, Alara," she'd whispered, a knowing smile playing on her lips. Alara felt a flush, a warmth that spread through her chest, confirming what she already knew. Elias in turn began to share more of his past. He spoke of growing up by the sea, a fisherman's son, of his yearning for the solitude and responsibility of the lighthouse, a place where he felt he truly belonged. He'd never imagined belonging anywhere else, or with anyone else, until now. Alara listened, not just with her ears, but with her heart, seeing the quiet strength and deep loyalty that underpinned his every word. She understood his love for the rhythmic predictability of his life, the constant vigil, the steady light. And she realized that her own quiet solitude, once a sanctuary, was now a space large enough for two, enriched by his presence, not diminished. Her friends, particularly the effervescent Mrs. Gable and the gruff but kind Captain Silas, observed the change in Alara with a mixture of delight and good-natured teasing. Mrs. Gable, ever the romantic, often left extra pastries at Alara's door, always one for Elias. Captain Silas, who had known Alara since she was a slip of a girl, would simply nod sagely whenever he saw Elias accompanying her, a rare, approving smile gracing his weather-beaten face. Elias, with his quiet charm and helpful nature, quickly found his place within the small, close-knit community. He'd help Captain Silas unload his catch, offer a strong arm to Mrs. Gable, carrying her flour sacks, and even patiently explain the intricacies of tides to the curious village children who often clustered around Alara's shop. He wasn't just Alara's companion, he was becoming part of the village fabric, a steady anchor in their coastal world. As weeks turned into months, the seasons shifted, painting the world outside Alara's window in new colors. Autumn brought rustling leaves and crisp air, winter draped the village in a hush of snow, and spring burst forth with vibrant light. With each passing day, Alara found her feelings for Elias deepening, growing beyond the initial wonder into a profound, comforting love. She loved the way his hand found hers instinctively on their walks, the warmth of his presence across the table as she worked, the way he would sometimes lean against her doorframe, just watching her, a soft smile playing on his lips. It was a love built on shared silences as much as shared words, on mutual respect and a deep, abiding understanding of each other's quiet souls. Yet, a tiny seed of apprehension sometimes stirred within Alara. Her life had been so perfectly balanced, so meticulously crafted for one. She cherished her independence, her artistic solitude. What would it mean to fully intertwine her life with another, even one as gentle and understanding as Elias? It wasn't a doubt about him, but a quiet fear about herself, about losing a part of the identity she had so carefully cultivated. She hadn't dared voice these thoughts, not wanting to disturb the beautiful, fragile peace they had built. One evening, after a particularly fierce winter storm had raged for days, cutting off the village and keeping Elias confined to the lighthouse, Alara found herself pacing her small cottage. The wind howled like a banshee, and the rain lashed against the windows. She worried for him alone in the towering structure, battling the elements. She worried for the ships at sea, guided by his unwavering light. More than that, she felt a profound sense of missing him, a hollow ache in her chest that surprised her with its intensity. It wasn't just the absence of his company, it was the absence of his reassuring presence, the quiet strength that had become an integral part of her daily rhythm. When the storm finally broke, leaving behind a world scrubbed clean and sparkling, Alara bundled herself up and hurried towards the lighthouse. She found Elias on the catwalk, checking for damage, his face streaked with grime but his eyes clear and steady. He turned at her approach, a smile blooming on his face that chased away the last vestiges of the storm's chill. "Elara," he said, his voice raspy from shouting over the wind. "I was just about to come to you." She reached him, her hands going instinctively to his strong, weathered arms. "Are you all right? Was it bad?" He nodded. "One of the worst I've seen, but the light held, always does." He looked at her then, truly looked, and something shifted in his gaze, a vulnerability she hadn't seen before. "I missed you," he admitted, his voice softer, almost hesitant. "More than I thought possible, being up here alone knowing the dangers. I kept thinking of you, safe in your cottage, and then I just wanted to be there with you." His words, simple and honest, resonated deep within her. In that moment, her quiet apprehension dissolved like sea foam. It wasn't about losing herself. It was about finding a deeper, richer version of herself, one that was capable of this profound connection, this aching need for another. She realized that her solitude had been a beautiful chapter, but it was not the whole story. The strength she found in gentle hearts was not just an observation. It was a truth she now embodied, a truth made manifest in her love for Elias. "I missed you too," she confessed, her voice thick with emotion. "Terribly. I couldn't stop thinking about you up here, alone." He pulled her into a warm embrace, holding her close against the rough wool of his coat, the scent of sea salt and Elias a comforting anchor. "Never alone," he murmured into her hair. "Not anymore." That evening, back in Alara's cozy cottage, bathed in the soft glow of her lamps, Elias helped her light a fire, the flames crackling merrily. He watched her as she moved about, preparing a simple meal, her quiet grace a familiar comfort. He cleared his throat. "Elara," he began, his voice a little deeper than usual. "There's something I want to ask you." Her heart gave a little lurch. She turned, her hand still holding a mixing bowl, her eyes wide with a mixture of anticipation and a gentle fear. This was it, she knew. The moment of commitment, the forging of their paths. He walked towards her, taking the bowl from her hands and setting it gently aside. He took her hands in his thumbs tracing slow circles on her skin. His gaze was earnest, unwavering, reflecting the same steady light he tended at the lighthouse. "My life at the lighthouse, it's a solitary one. It always has been. I thought it was all I needed. But since everything has changed, the quiet moments aren't empty anymore. They're filled with thoughts of you. The work isn't just a duty. It's a light guiding me back to you." He paused, taking a deep breath. "I don't want to be alone anymore, Alara. Not truly alone. I want to share my sunsets with you, my storms with you, my quiet mornings with you. I want to be the light that guides you home, and I want you to be my home." He knelt then, slowly, gracefully, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a small, beautifully carved wooden box, smooth and dark like polished driftwood. He opened it, revealing not a sparkling diamond, but a ring crafted from silver, inlaid with a small, perfectly round piece of sea glass, the color of the deepest ocean. It was simple, elegant, and utterly perfect for her. "Alara," he said, his voice soft but firm, "will you share your life with me? Will you be my wife, my partner in all seasons, my steady compass?" Tears welled in Alara's eyes, not of sadness, but of overwhelming joy and a profound sense of belonging. The apprehension she'd felt earlier was completely gone, replaced by a radiant certainty. This wasn't about losing herself. It was about gaining an entire universe. "Oh, Elias," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Yes, 1,000 times, yes." He rose, slipping the sea glass ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, cool against her skin, a tangible symbol of their unique love story, born of the sea and quiet hearts. He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs gently wiping away her tears, and then he kissed her, a kiss that was both tender and deep, a promise of forever. The news spread through the village like wildfire, carried on the sea breeze, and Mrs. Gable's excited chatter. The community, who had watched Alara and Elias's quiet courtship blossom, rejoiced with them. There was talk of a small, intimate wedding, perhaps on the cliffs overlooking the sea, or in Alara's cozy garden, blooming with spring flowers. Alara and Elias spent the next few months planning their future, not just the wedding but the shared life that lay beyond. Elias began to spend more time at the cottage, bringing his tools and books, slowly but surely making it their shared sanctuary. He even started a small vegetable patch in the garden, his large hands surprisingly gentle as he turned the soil, a metaphor for the careful cultivation of their life together. Alara, in turn, found herself spending more nights at the lighthouse, falling asleep to the rhythmic sweep of its beam across the dark sea, feeling utterly safe and cherished. They talked for hours, late into the night, sharing dreams and fears, weaving their individual paths into a single, strong tapestry. One day, Alara found Elias staring at a blank wall in her workshop, a thoughtful expression on his face. "What is it?" she asked, curious. "This wall," he said, turning to her. "It's perfect. We could build shelves here, for your books, for our books, and perhaps a small desk for me, for my charts, so I can be near you when you work." Alara's heart swelled. It wasn't just about the shelves, it was about the use. It was about building a life together, brick by brick, book by book, chart by chart, die chart. Their wedding day dawned bright and clear, a perfect late spring day. The air was soft, filled with the scent of wild roses and sea salt. Alara wore a dress of simple cream linen, embroidered with tiny seashells and delicate waves, a gift from Mrs. Gable, who had secretly enlisted the village seamstress. Her hair was woven with sprigs of rosemary and tiny white blossoms from her garden. Elias, in his best dark trousers and a crisp white shirt, looked handsome and radiant, his eyes shining with profound happiness as he watched Alara walk towards him. They stood on the cliff edge, the vast, shimmering sea stretching out behind them, its ceaseless murmur a gentle backdrop to their vows. Captain Silas, surprisingly teary-eyed, officiated, his voice rough but sincere. Only a handful of close friends and villagers were present, their faces beaming with joy. As Elias slipped a simple silver band onto Alara's finger, mirroring her sea glass ring, the lighthouse beam, almost imperceptible in the daylight, seemed to wink in approval from its distant perch. Their reception was held in Alara's garden, transformed into a magical space with fairy lights strung between the trees and tables, laden with delicious food prepared by Mrs. Gable and her eager helpers. Music drifted from a fiddle and a flageolet, played by two local fishermen. Laughter mingled with the gentle lapping of waves. Alara and Elias danced, their movements slow and graceful, lost in each other's eyes, their hands clasped firmly. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery oranges and soft purples, Elias led Alara to the small, newly built bench beneath the ancient oak tree in her garden. He wrapped an arm around her, pulling her close. "This," he said, gesturing to the vibrant garden, "the warm glow of the cottage, the distant gleam of the lighthouse, this is everything I never knew I wanted." Alara leaned her head on his shoulder, her heart overflowing. "And it's more beautiful than anything I could have ever imagined," she replied, her voice soft with contentment. "My quiet world, it's not quiet anymore, not in the way it was. It's vibrant, filled with laughter and shared moments. It's deeper, richer." She looked at the sea glass ring on her finger, then up at Elias. "You brought the world to me, Elias. You showed me that even the most perfectly content solitude could be made infinitely more wonderful with companionship, with love." He kissed the top of her head. "And you, Alara, you showed me that my steady light could be a beacon for a home, not just for ships. You gave my purpose a heart." Their days continued, a gentle dance of shared routines and new discoveries. Alara still bound her books, her hands still crafted beauty, but now Elias would often sit nearby, reading from one of her finished volumes, his quiet presence a comforting hum. He still tended the lighthouse, his unwavering gaze sweeping the horizon, but now, when he returned, there was always Alara waiting, a warm meal on the table, a story ready to be shared. They continued their walks by the sea, their hands intertwined, their conversations flowing easily, sometimes interspersed with long, comfortable silences. They watched countless sunrises and sunsets together, each one a testament to the beauty of their unfolding life. The cottage, once Alara's sanctuary, was now Waithfi home, filled with the scent of old books, sea air, and the quiet joy of two souls perfectly attuned. Alara would sometimes sit in the fading light of her workshop, the day's work done, and trace the smooth, cool surface of her sea glass ring. She thought of the stories she had bound, the lives she had touched, the quiet strength she had always admired in others. And she knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, a warmth that filled every corner of her being, that this was not just a beginning, but a beautiful, enduring continuation. Their story, woven with threads of quiet moments, unwavering light, and a love as vast and deep as the shimmering sea, was one that would unfold, chapter by heartwarming chapter for all their days. And as the lighthouse beam swept across the darkening sky, a steady, comforting rhythm, Alara closed her eyes, a peaceful smile on her lips, knowing that she was truly, wonderfully home.